Got it.
Got it. So Malin, firstly, tell me a bit more about you and your role at Mastercard.
Sure. So I lead strategic growth in Mastercard, mainly for the Nordics and Baltics countries. And in that, I look at the interconnection between economic development, sustainability, and overall societal development, and Mastercard's role in that. I also have the pleasure of being part of the team which establishes Mastercard Sustainability Innovation Lab, which is a global lab which happens to be based out of Sweden in Stockholm.
Oh, brilliant. And we know lots of people that are going to be listening to this, lots of the organizations that are going to be tuning in will be really interested in, similarly, they'll be working in big organizations trying to deliver impact. So they'll be really interested in Mastercard Sustainability Lab and what it's trying to achieve. So can you just tell me a bit more about the background behind the lab and why it was set up and what it's hoping to achieve for Mastercard ultimately?
Absolutely. So Mastercard is a company with a fairly small footprint from our own operations. And of course, we look at taking care of our own house first. We have a net zero commitment now for 2040. But we also look at our role as a global network and the ecosystem that we connect. Today, we connect 2.6 billion people across the globe through 22,000 banks. And we've started to look into what we can do further to support the climate transition from that perspective. And the lab is one of many ways in which we can really offer our network. And this time it's really focusing on transforming the way people consume, companies produce goods and services so that we can understand what a transition towards sustainable consumption can look like. Some data says that 60% of emissions globally today are related to the stuff that we consume or producing those goods. So given the role that Mastercard has, being in the heart of global commerce, we also understand that we could have a role in trying to boost and accelerate that transformation that is much needed.
That's interesting. And do you feel like you're getting more pressure, if that's the right word, from your network and from your partners to start taking this stuff more seriously at the moment?
I think we see a lot of good examples of forerunners, financial institutions, banks, fintechs, but also consumer pressure. Today, some of our research says that 85% of adults globally are willing to change their everyday lifestyle to cater for the environment. And if 85% are ready to do so, and we still see that the reality doesn't look that way, how can we support in closing that gap? We call it cognitive dissonance, and we want to understand how we can further help consumers to start living a more sustainable lifestyle and do more mindful spending choices.
That's really interesting. So, Malin, can you bring to life what the lab is doing in a bit more detail? Can you give us some examples of the types of, I guess, challenges or briefs that it's working on, or maybe if you can share any of the things that are starting to come out of the lab in terms of solutions to these problems?
Sure, absolutely. So this is not Mastercard's first innovation lab. We have a number of them across the globe. So it builds on the labs model that we've deployed for many years. Another example is our financial inclusion lab in Nairobi, Kenya, which we started a few years back in partnership with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And that was also at the same time as we committed to bring 500 million people into the formal economy. We call it financial inclusion. And the lab in Nairobi, Kenya has really been important in order to deploy and engineer new solutions that is needed to make sure that these individuals can actually access the digital economy. And in a similar way, we target another part of the ESG agenda with the Sustainability Innovation Lab. We focus more on the environmental sustainability, and we have a fairly audacious goal, which is to make sure that everyone with a Mastercard in their hand can start to understand the impact of their consumption and start making more mindful spending choices. So basically leading towards sustainable consumption. And the lab we are setting up the lab now. We are hiring a number of great people both front-end engineers, back-end engineers, service design leaders, etc. And we build on a model that we started actually a couple of years back, when we look at how can we further equip our network with new sustainability-centric solutions. And one example, also coming out of Sweden actually, is a fintech called Duconomy. We started a more formal relationship and partnership with them a couple of years back. It builds on a solution called Åland Index, which basically maps the CO2 emissions related to your spending. So it gives an understanding of what are the related CO2 emissions if you go to a grocery store, or if you go and buy apparel or clothing, if you fill up your car with gas, etc. And so that journey started and was a very important part of creating the Sustainability Innovation Lab, so we can further create sustainability-centric solutions, sometimes deployed, with Mastercard engineering, and sometimes we tap into fintech and partners and bring them onto our network.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting. And I remember reading when I was reading up on the lab that a big part of it is about working with startups. It's about not just creating everything from scratch, but another part that we're really interested in as well is how you talk a lot about co-creation with the audience. And can you bring that to life for us a bit more? And the reason I asked that question is, co-creation is a real buzzword, and big organizations love the idea of doing it, but often can find it quite difficult to do it well. So can you tell us a bit more about how co-creation within either the Sustainability Lab and or the one in Nairobi that you mentioned, like how you work with customers and how you bring them into a process in a lab like that and what it looks like?
Absolutely. So we have deployed a foundation for the Sustainability Lab on 3 main services. And that is our R&D center, which is all about creating and engineering new solutions. We have the labs as a service part, which provides Mastercard partners and customers, it can be banks, merchants, governments, with innovation capabilities. So we bring innovation methodologies, and based on each partner's agenda and their maturity in sustainability innovation, we help them to accelerate basically what they can bring to their customers. And then the third service is called the Experience Center, which we open here in Stockholm during next spring. It will be both a physical showroom of various ways and applications of sustainability solutions, current and in the future, and also something, of course, that we offer in a web-based solution so that anyone across the globe can access it without actually jumping on a plane to Stockholm. That would defeat its purpose. But so going back to, if we take the R&D center, where we really want to engineer the new solutions, replicating what we've done in Nairobi, we tap into a full ecosystem of partners. That includes the usual suspects being Mastercard partners and customers, but also academia, leading researchers, NGOs, civil society, government, and a number of other stakeholders which support that creation. So we make sure that we make meaningful development. In the same way, we will use that model for the Stockholm-based lab, where we access to world-leading planetary researchers, which has also been part of guiding the process and the strategy in shaping the lab today.
And am I right in thinking that that's input into what the lab works on and where it focuses and where it starts on some of the briefs?
Yeah, I think what we quickly came to understand during the spring when we really set the foundation to create the lab was that, we actually got access to significant data which came to the public through the IPCC report, and we could access that a little bit earlier. And we quickly, of course, got an understanding in terms of the world now entering the Anthropocene. 9 out of 15 planetary systems are reaching their tipping points. We have about 7 or 8 years to really change this evolution. And some researchers call it the decade of action. And that's also why we wanted to create the lab to be really action oriented. We're not going to be successful if we only develop and engineer the best sustainability solutions in the world, being a payment network, but we really need to scale it as well. So it's only in the combination between the engineering of new solutions and scaling it through our network, which can lead to that every Mastercard user can make sustainable consumption choices.
That's interesting. And this idea of having a kind of dedicated innovation lab is quite an exciting one. So, lots of big organizations here in the UK, if they don't already, they are thinking about a similar type concept. And, maybe on a different thematic area, it might not necessarily be sustainability, but the concept of kind of having a dedicated innovation lab that can sit kind of by the side of the business, but support those purpose goals is something that a lot more people we're seeing here thinking about and wanting to do. So you mentioned this isn't Mastercard's only lab. You've got the Nairobi one. You've had one or two in the past. So really interested to know, Malin, I guess learn from your experience of kind of setting up these labs and running these labs. And I guess with the benefit of hindsight, is there anything that, I guess, what are the lessons you've learned in terms of setting these labs up and running them so that they're really effective and that they achieve the goals that they're trying to achieve for an organization?
I think for us in Mastercard, it has really been about de-risking innovation and de-risking product development. We have a model where we run a studio process in a very structured way today, and we have very clear metrics on how a innovation is evolving through this process. Looking at also our cybersecurity center in Israel or our AI center in Canada, we see a number of examples of innovations going through the studio process, and then they also graduate into the Mastercard organization. And one example is a innovation that was deployed in our Singapore-based innovation lab, which we today call Mastercard Provenance. And Mastercard Provenance is a blockchain-based solution building on Mastercard being really good as a trusted network provider, where this it can include payments, and it does, but it can also be about tracing and tracking other metrics in a value chain where you need to secure the data from the different stakeholders carrying on that data. And Mastercard Provenance graduated from the Singapore lab a year ago or so, and is today scaling very successfully. And it's also a solution that is very relevant for the Sustainability Innovation Lab, because it enables traceability across value chain on emission data. So we are now looking to how do we use this graduated product in Mastercard to further boost the ability to reach product level emission data, so that consumers furthermore can start understanding the differences between various products and make more meaningful consumption choices.
Just had a good question. It's jumped out of my mind.
That's fine.
What was I going to ask you?
I think you wanted to talk about the teams and the talent that we attract as well.
It was, yes, but something else has just jumped into my mind. Bear with me a second. What was I going to ask you there? You were talking about. Yes, sorry, I've just remembered it. So, as I say, labs sound very shiny and they sound very exciting. In your mind, what are the benefits of approaching big innovation challenges via a lab model versus, say, just embedding it within existing teams? Like, what are the good and the bad bits around a lab versus other models of innovation in your point of view?
This becomes a bit of a personal reflection, but having worked in big organizations and I've always worked with deploying new business areas and looking at new opportunities, I think what is part of a very traditional model is to look at product market fit, make the sizing, come up with a business case very early on, so that you can thereafter access the resources that you need to deploy this to a scalable solution and basically go execute. By using the labs, you are working in a little bit more protected environment in terms of that you don't need to lead the deployment with a business case from start, but you can actually have a much more, exploratory, user-centric innovation process. And even though lab sounds like a very creative, open-minded, cool environment, it's a very structured process actually. So it's all about finding that structure that works for your organization, which I think is different actually between, what type of company you are, what culture you have, etc. But for us, it's all about providing that protected environment to de-risk innovation and allow us to explore without even knowing, will this make sense for the market and for the stakeholders at all? And of course, most of the innovations, they don't reach the graduation. And that's a success in itself to make sure that you have an openness that maybe, 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20 innovation reach the final stage of that innovation process.
And how do you find that graduation process? And the reason that I ask that is, from our own experience at Good Innovation and even some of our clients, one of the things that we find hardest with the lab model is not the delivering the process within the lab, it's taking things out of the lab and into business as usual. And because you've separated it a little bit from the start, it's not inherently there when you try and kind of embed and scale it up. And you mentioned that example in Singapore, and it's already a year later and it's scaling up. So is that graduation a challenge for Mastercard? And kind of what do you do to make sure that it's a smooth process to come from the lab into business as usual?
As we work today, we approach the intake in the portfolio of innovation ideas and concepts very much in alignment with the key product owners in Mastercard. So in the case of the Sustainability Innovation Lab, there are a number of teams and colleagues on global level, which responsibility is to scale and bring to market the sustainability solutions that we have today. And they are very much, it's a very close partnership with those teams. So we make sure that we not only bring solutions that is, have a huge innovation capacity or, solving for really big challenges, but also is timing wise relevant as the next phase of capabilities for our organization. So that partnership with our core business is really important. And having learned from a number of organizations who've set up various innovation hubs or company X establishments, I think those who have been successful are those that manage to really partner up with the core team in the organization. Those that place themselves even in a different geography and have a very closed environment in terms of this team being very sheltered. I think that disconnection makes it a little bit more difficult and a little bit more cumbersome process when you are in the stage of having an innovation ready to graduate from the lab environment. So that has helped us at least. And for the Sustainability Innovation Lab, it's still very early days. So I'm sure that we will evolve with this and learn from our experiences. And it's probably going to look different in a year than what it does today.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned you're in the early stages of the lab in Sweden and in Stockholm. And you mentioned right at the start that you're bringing sort of the clever people on board to be part of the lab and to work within it. And I'm really interested to know what sort of talent and skills and experience you look for to kind of bring into a lab. And I guess, do you find it challenging to find the right kind of people to come and be part of a model and a process like that?
If I go back to the various services that we have and take two of them, the R&D Center and the Labs as a Service component, it requires a little bit different skill set and profiles. So in the R&D Center, it's a lot about full stack developers, UI UX designers, service design leaders, innovation leaders, which can be teaming up to take through the innovations through the studio process. If I look at the Labs as a Service model, it's really an environment where our colleagues needs to be able to bring innovation capabilities on behalf of a client. So those two models and approaches are a little bit different, and it requires different skill sets and experiences. I think a privilege to have a lab that really focuses on, playing a meaningful role for the transition that is required for us, makes it, very attractive for highly talented people. It has for many years been fairly difficult to find, to access the best, developers. A lot of change and growth and evolution is related to tech today, and therefore it's a little bit unbalanced in supply and demand. But I think more and more what we see, that many organizations see, is that purpose-driven companies can attract the best talent. And I think maybe 5-10 years ago, it was really, really cool to work for the, large tech companies, accessing and deploying, the new technology. Those who early could work with deep learning or deep tech and AI, etc. It was really, really attractive for many of those individuals, being, the developers. Today, I think it's actually not as easy, only if you're a company driving deep tech. But if you're a purpose-driven company, you're much more able to attract the best talent.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and probably a really positive message for some of the people listening to this, because I think, again, here in the UK, we face that challenge of, you could go and do this for Google, go and do an exciting project for Google over there, for example. So, why come work on this? But I guess anecdotally, we see this shift here as well around actually adding that purpose layer on top of that. Makes you such a much more kind of attractive proposition to bring in people that wouldn't otherwise come and work on a project or a theme like that.
And there are a number of examples, even, from where I'm joining you today in Stockholm. In Sweden, there are now a number of startups that support the green transition significantly. We have new companies on green steel. We have new companies on electrical battery for the battery industry, and those companies, 2 of them have attracted over 100 billion euros in investments just the last few years, and that is also, of course, something that attracts talent all across the globe to come and join and really spend, their full time and capacity on supporting this transition. Overall, I think it's a bit hard to say, but I think there will be 2 types of companies in the future. One, it will be the companies who had a meaningful role in the transition toward low carbon economies. And there will be those who don't exist anymore.
Interesting. Yes, that's a really good way of putting it. And I guess, Malin, this is a very good time to be having this conversation. COP26 is happening at the moment, and obviously that's in the news a lot, and it's very front of mind for people. So given that, I guess, sustainability has become so zeitgeist at the moment, and it's, front of every world leader's agenda via COP26, what impact has that had for you? Is it helping the Sustainability Lab gain traction and interest, or is it presenting any challenges?
The interest for the Sustainability Lab since the launch in September has been tremendous. So it's also part of the process now in the establishment to educate our future partners on, how do you establish a structured sustainability innovation model? Where are you in the innovation cycle? Is it actually the right timing to access the Sustainability Innovation Lab, or are there things that might be good to focus on initially before coming to Mastercard and co-create new solutions? So that is something that the team spends quite some time on, to make sure that the pipeline of partners that we haven't prioritized is where we also see the largest opportunities for impact at scale. Having COP26 running now, I think, I'm during the nights, I'm following up what has happened during the day before, and it's great to see some of the new pledges made by a number of governments and countries. But what I'm waiting for the Sustainability Innovation Lab and for the enablement of sustainable consumption are basically, yeah, it's one main question, and that's the price on carbon. If we can get a price on carbon and have regulations supporting that, it will not only be consumers who are very purpose driven in their choices, but also it will be, you know, a matter of cost in terms of comparing various products when you consume and make your purchasing. And then connected to that, it will be of utmost importance that we reach much more transparency on global supply chains. If we can have more transparency on global supply chains, more data will be made available to consumers. And it's critical in order to make informed choices.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if that's going to be part of what we see on November 12th when COP26 will be closing.
Yes, we shall see. And I really like the way you phrase that. So there'll be two types of companies, you know, in 7 or 8 years' time, and you know, the ones that have taken it seriously and the ones that aren't around. So I'm really interested in, let's project forward. Let's say it's 8 years' time from today, and you know, you and I have the fortune of getting together for a coffee, and you're telling me about all the amazing things that the Sustainability Lab has achieved. And I guess I'm really interested in, what's your ultimate vision for the lab? You know, if it does everything it's trying to achieve, what will that look like? What's changed for the lab, for Mastercard, but I guess more importantly for the wider e-commerce industry, and I guess the planet as a whole?
So the big audacious goal is to make sure that everyone in our network can make sustainable consumption choices. And just putting a reference number out there, that would basically mean 3 billion people across the globe. And having reached that by 2030, if that was the timing, I think then we would also see that we have product labeling on emissions data. And we have managed to have the most wealthy people globally lead by example and make sustainable consumption an aspirational, not only an aspiration, but actually something that is accessible for the many people. But I would like to see the most wealthy ones leading by example.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Malin, thank you so much. We've got through all of my questions. Is there anything else we haven't covered, we haven't talked about, that you think would be really interesting, you're keen to mention?
I think as this will be, as those who will be listening from this conversation today might think about establishing their own innovation labs, I would just welcome people to think of how can you start small. You don't need to establish, you know, a full lab organization, but maybe there are parts of your organization or your business which can require de-risking the innovation and having a little bit different approach. And if that is to carve out 10, 15, 50% or 15% of the organization's capacity to start doing this, that's something I would invite everyone to consider. And it doesn't need to be a shape of the lab. It's more a way of working, and it's basically a practice which you can start today.
Oh, brilliant. And I guess for those that are really interested in what you're doing and that really exciting goal, if people want to, I guess, follow the lab and what the Mastercard Sustainability Lab is doing and what's coming out of it, what's the best way for them to do that? Where do they look for information?
So those who are part of our network, they normally have a relationship established with our team. So they would just reach out to their Mastercard contact and they will put you in contact with the Sustainability Innovation Lab and also guide them through the process of the sustainability innovation cycle that we call it. So we might actually come back to you and work with that team to see where are you in that cycle today, and is the lab the most relevant collaboration opportunity for you, or are there other things we should jointly look at from start? And then there are, of course, a number of startups and organizations having solutions that enable sustainable consumption out there. I would also invite them to reach out to us, because as we started the relationship with the economy, we would never had the Mastercard carbon calculator available to 22,000 banks today if it wouldn't have been for this FinTech Mastercard partnership. So we'd really welcome them to reach out as well.
Brilliant. And this is more a interest question from me, if anything else, Malin. It might not go in the interview, but you've talked a lot about collaboration with startups, for example. Where, if anywhere, do charities in the sustainability space fall into the kind of collaboration angle of what the lab is? Do you work with charities, and kind of how and who?
Yeah, this is actually a tricky question, I find, because I don't have a solution in place or answer. But if we take it maybe off the interview, and then you can see what you take in. But we have something called Mastercard Donate today. It's a technical solution enabling additional transactions when you make a purchase, and those transactions go into NGO investments or NGO donations. Yeah. And what I would be looking for most likely, because if you take a step back and think about, okay, this carbon calculator, it allows you to understand the carbon emissions related to a specific transaction. Mastercard Donate enables you to compensate for that purchase or your overall, spending on a monthly, yearly basis. And I think we need more and more investments into projects which are carbon capturing or like new innovations related to climate, so that we can power or enable donations to those. Most of the NGOs that we have in our network through Mastercard Donate, which is 15,000 organizations across the globe, they are mainly focusing on the social aspect on ESG. Yeah. So I would like to see what NGO mobilization can we access to invest. If it's reforestation, like Mastercard has its own Prices Planet coalition, is it other ways in which the consumer then can get an ability to compensate for its spending while making the transition to more sustainable consumption choices?
Yeah, interesting. Again, not one for the interview and for the video, Malin, but more out of interest. Do you talked about academia, for example, as kind of bringing expertise, deep expertise into sustainability. Do you work with charities in the sustainability space to bring that kind of expertise and that knowledge? So, very crudely, you could work, for example, with the WWF on a specific sustainability challenge because it's one of their core areas of focus, and they're on the ground in Brazil doing the thing that you're trying to achieve, for example. Is that something that you consider in the lab? And if not, I'm interested in like, what are the barriers to some of that?
We've had the approach to work with NGOs for a long time in a number of areas. And in the background here, you have an imagery of a forest, which is related to our Prices Planet Coalition initiative. And the Prices Planet Coalition aims to plant 100 million trees by 2025, not only as a way to capture carbon, because trees are still the most efficient way doing so, but also to boost biodiversity and positive community effects for those local areas. And as you can imagine, Mastercard is not, the best, doesn't access the best researchers internally on how to find the most relevant projects, how to ensure that we get the most ROI from those three aspects, and to ensure the maintenance of these trees, because it's about, the next 20, 30, 40 years of effect. So we work with two organizations. It's Conservation International and World Resources Institute. And we also have a scientific board, an advisory board, where we have a number of experts supporting and guiding us through this. So we very much put this in the hands of those who are global experts, without trying to equip ourselves with that type of expertise.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If I would mention two examples for the lab, what we are it has been more on a case-by-case basis, as we are still, we haven't even done our first quarter. But there are two areas where I'm looking at accessing the best research in the world, and that's about the cognitive dissonance that I mentioned.
Yeah.
And here we have some researchers and some universities being really leading on environmental behavior research. And then it's, of course, the overall planetary research. And we're privileged to have Stockholm Resilience Center here in Sweden, which created the planetary boundaries. So there are a number of important research that we need to tap into and offer the Sustainability Innovation Lab collaboration model around.
Yeah, interesting. Malin, thank you so much. I feel like we could talk for a couple of hours here, but I'm sure you've got lots of things to do.